In the vast tapestry of existence, we find ourselves weaving the threads of our lives, each decision, each moment, a stroke upon the canvas. In the pursuit of a life well lived, the ancient philosophy of Stoicism emerges as a guiding light, urging us to embrace the role of the Stoic artist. As Seneca, the revered Stoic philosopher, once declared, "He suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary." Picture your life as a masterpiece in progress, a canvas stretched across the annals of time. The Stoic artist, armed with the wisdom of Seneca and the Stoic legends, is a craftsman of the soul, chiseling away at the superfluous to reveal the essence of a meaningful existence. In the realm of Stoicism, we confront the turbulent sea of emotions that threaten to capsize our vessel. It is here that we draw inspiration from the Stoic paragon, Epictetus, who exhorts us to distinguish between what is within our control and what is not. To be the Stoic artist is to cultivate an inner sanctuary, impervious to the storms of fate, to navigate the tempest with a serene composure born of self-control. The Stoic brushstrokes, composed of resilience and fortitude, paint a portrait of a life guided by reason rather than the capricious whims of fortune. Like Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, we are reminded that very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. As we delve deeper into the Stoic atelier, we encounter the transformative power of mindfulness. The Stoic artist cultivates an acute awareness of destructive emotions, acknowledging their presence without succumbing to their corrosive influence. In the words of Seneca, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The Stoic artist dismantles the illusions that bind the soul, revealing the untarnished core within. In the symphony of Stoicism, we find solace in the resonance of interconnectedness. The Stoic artist understands that our individual brushstrokes contribute to the broader canvas of humanity. The Stoic soul is tethered to the collective, recognizing a shared struggle for virtue and wisdom. Let us embrace the mantle of the Stoic artist, for in the crucible of Stoicism, we forge a life of meaning and purpose. As we navigate the labyrinth of existence, let the words of the Stoic legends echo in our minds, urging us to transcend the ephemeral and embrace the enduring. For in the stillness of self-control and the fortitude, Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher born in the 1st century AD, provided profound insights and practical approaches to life through his teachings. His philosophy, encapsulated in the Enchiridion handbook, emphasizes the cultivation of virtue, self-discipline, and resilience. Let's delve into some key aspects of Epictetus's teachings. 1. Dichotomy of control. Teaching. Epictetus introduced the concept of the dichotomy of control, urging individuals to discern between what is within their control and what lies beyond it. Application. Focus your energy and attention on things you can control, your thoughts, actions, and attitudes. External events and others' opinions are beyond your control. Therefore, investing excessive emotion in them is futile. 2. Acceptance of fate. Teaching. Epictetus advocated accepting the inevitability of certain events and outcomes. He believed that our reactions to external events are within our control. Application. Instead of resisting or lamenting circumstances, embrace them with equanimity. By accepting the present moment, one can maintain inner peace and avoid unnecessary suffering. 3. Endurance and resilience. Teaching. Epictetus stressed the importance of enduring hardships and adversities with resilience. He believed that challenges provide opportunities for growth and the development of character. Application. View challenges as opportunities for learning and self-improvement. Rather than being overwhelmed by difficulties, approach them with a Stoic mindset, recognizing that your response to adversity is a testament to your character. 4. The power of choice. Teaching. According to Epictetus, individuals have the power to choose their responses to external events. Freedom lies in one's ability to control their attitudes and reactions. Application. Practice mindfulness and self-awareness to consciously choose your responses. By taking responsibility for your reactions, you reclaim power over your emotional state. 5. Preparation for inevitable events. Teaching. Epictetus encouraged individuals to mentally prepare for the challenges they might face. By anticipating difficulties, one can approach them with greater composure. Application and contemplate potential obstacles and setbacks in advance. This mental preparation allows you to face challenges with a calm and collected mind, reducing the impact of negative emotion. Certainly, let's explore a few more nuanced approaches inspired by Epictetus's teachings. 7. Mindful attention to impressions. Teaching. Epictetus emphasized paying careful attention to the initial impressions we receive from external events. These impressions are not necessarily truths, but subjective interpretations. Application. Practice suspending immediate judgments about events. Instead of reacting impulsively, take a moment to reflect on your initial impressions. This pause allows for a more measured and thoughtful response. 8. Discipline of desire and aversion. Teaching. Epictetus urged individuals to discipline their desires and aversions. Excessive attachment to desires or avoidance of discomfort can lead to suffering. Application. Reflect on your desires and aversions. Question whether these preferences are in line with reason and virtue. Cultivate a mindset where your well-being is not contingent on the fulfillment of fleeting desires or the avoidance of discomfort. 9. Amor fati, love of fate. Teaching. Epictetus advocated embracing and loving whatever comes our way, even if it seems undesirable. Amor fati is about accepting the totality of your life, the good and the challenging. Application. Instead of resisting or resenting difficulties, practice embracing them as integral parts of your journey. Find meaning and opportunity in every experience, recognizing that each moment contributes to the richness of your life. 10. Examine and challenge beliefs. Gao teaching. Epictetus encouraged individuals to examine their beliefs and question their assumptions. Many of our distressing emotions arise from irrational beliefs. Application. Regularly engage in self-reflection. Identify and challenge beliefs that contribute to negative emotions. By cultivating a rational mindset, you can reframe your perspective and reduce unnecessary suffering. 11. Fulfill your roles virtuously. Teaching. Epictetus highlighted the importance of fulfilling one's roles in life with virtue. Whether as a parent, friend, or professional, acting virtuously in each role contributes to a meaningful life. Application. Consciously consider the roles you play in various aspects of your life. Strive to embody virtues like kindness, honesty, and justice in each role. By aligning your actions with virtue, you contribute positively to your own life and the lives of others. Certainly, let's explore how 3 prominent Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, might approach a common problem through their distinct perspectives within Stoicism. Problem: facing a major setback in career. 1. Epictetus, the dichotomy of control. Approach. Epictetus would first guide individuals to distinguish between what is within their control and what is not. In the face of a career setback, he would emphasize that factors like economic conditions, the actions of colleagues, or external market trends are beyond one's control. Advice: focus on your own actions and responses. Instead of dwelling on the setback itself, concentrate on how you can adapt, learn, and persevere with dignity. Epictetus would encourage the individual to cultivate resilience and inner strength, recognizing that their true power lies in their attitude toward the situation. 2. Seneca, Stoic resilience and virtuous living. Approach. Seneca, known for his emphasis on virtue and resilience, would counsel individuals to view the setback as an opportunity for moral growth. He would stress that the measure of a person's character is revealed during challenging times. Advice. Seneca might advise reflecting on how one can maintain their integrity and virtue despite the setback. He would encourage the individual to explore new perspectives, perhaps even seeing the setback as a chance for a more meaningful career path. Seneca's focus would be on the cultivation of wisdom and virtue in the face of adversity, aligning one's actions with the Stoic principles. 3. Marcus Aurelius. Acceptance of the universal nature. Approach. Marcus Aurelius, as a Stoic emperor, would likely approach the problem with an acknowledgement of the universal nature of setbacks. He would draw upon the Stoic concept of the interconnectedness of all things and the inevitability of challenges in life. Advice. Marcus might guide the individual to accept the setback as part of the broader tapestry of existence. By recognizing the transient nature of external events, he would emphasize the importance of maintaining an inner calm and steadfast commitment to one's principles. Marcus Aurelius might encourage the individual to view the setback with a sense of cosmic acceptance, recognizing that challenges are an integral part of the human experience. Crafting a life of meaning and purpose is not only a philosophical pursuit, but also a practical path to success. The Stoic philosophy, with its emphasis on virtue, wisdom, and aligned action, provides a robust framework for achieving success in various aspects of life. Here's a more detailed exploration of how crafting such a life can lead to success. 1. Clarity of goals. Stoic perspective. A life of meaning begins with a clear understanding of one's values and goals. Stoicism encourages individuals to identify and prioritize what truly matters to them. Success connection. Clarity of goals allows for focused efforts. When your actions align with your deeply held values, you are more likely to make choices that lead to success. You avoid the distraction of pursuing superficial or externally imposed objectives, ensuring a more purposeful and fulfilling journey. 2. Resilience in the face of adversity. Stoic perspective. Stoicism teaches resilience, the ability to endure and overcome challenges without losing inner peace. Adversity is seen as an opportunity for growth and a test of one's character. Success connection. Success often involves navigating setbacks and obstacles. A Stoic mindset equips individuals to approach challenges with composure, learning from failures, and using setbacks as stepping stones toward achievement. The ability to maintain focus and determination in the face of adversity is a key component of long-term success. 3. Ethical decision-making. Stoic perspective. Virtue is central to Stoic philosophy. Living a virtuous life involves making ethical decisions guided by reason and wisdom. Success connection. Success that is built on a foundation of ethical behavior is more enduring. Stoicism encourages individuals to pursue success in ways that align with their values and contribute positively to the well-being of others. Ethical decision-making fosters trust and respect, key elements in building lasting success in personal and professional realms. 4. Focus on the present moment. Stoic perspective. Stoicism emphasizes the importance of the present moment. Dwelling on the past or worrying excessively about the future is discouraged. Success connection. Success is often achieved through focused, present-moment action. By concentrating on the task at hand and making the most of each moment, individuals can increase their efficiency and effectiveness. In the dimly lit corridors of our minds, we've encountered the Stoic legends, Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, whispering timeless truths that resonate with the echoes of ancient wisdom. The dichotomy of control, the acceptance of fate, the pursuit of virtue. These are the lanterns guiding us through the labyrinth of our existence. As we tread the treacherous path of life, the Stoic artist within us urges us to paint our stories with strokes of purpose and meaning. The canvas, tainted with the hues of suffering and joy, awaits the bold strokes of our resilience. It is in the crucible of adversity that in the profound shadows of Stoic wisdom, as we stand on the precipice of our own destinies, remember this. The journey of the Stoic artist is one of perpetual refinement, an odyssey through the depths of self-mastery and the crafting of a life rich in meaning. In the obsidian tapestry of existence, where resilience and virtue are the threads that bind us to our truest selves, subscribing to this channel becomes more than a mere click. It becomes a pact, a commitment to embark on a journey of profound transformation. As the echoes of ancient wisdom linger in the air, let the allure of a life steeped in purpose beckon you. Each video, a lantern in the gloom, illuminating the path toward a Stoic existence. Through the trials of adversity and the triumphs of self-discovery, this community, this collective journey, becomes a sanctuary for those who seek the artistry of a life well lived. So, my fellow seekers of Stoic fortitude, let the darkness within propel you toward the brilliance of your own potential. Subscribe to this channel where the symphony of Stoic insights plays in the chambers of your mind. Like the video, not merely as a gesture, but as a silent oath, an affirmation of your commitment to crafting a life of enduring significance. In this sanctuary of wisdom, where shadows and light dance in harmony, let us unite as Stoic artists, crafting, shaping, and etching our destinies with the indelible ink of purpose. Subscribe, like, and let the journey unfold, for in the dark corners of our souls, we discover the profound beauty of a life well crafted. Subscribe now, and together, let us delve deeper into the Stoic abyss. Like the video, and in the silence of that click, let the resonance of your commitment reverberate through the cosmos. Our journey has just begun, and it beckons to those who dare to embrace the shadows and find enlightenment within.